What would you do if, in a single moment, everything you knew was taken from you? One night, a boy was forced to flee into the wilderness, leaving behind a life that could never be reclaimed. Years later, he returned, not as the child who ran, but as a man with unfinished business. Some wounds heal, others demand justice. Dear family, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to support us and stay for this powerful story. Now let's begin. The wind howled through the pines, slamming rain against the towering windows of the Grand Montana estate. Lightning cracked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the sprawling mansion perched on the edge of a vast, empty landscape. The storm had rolled in fast, heavy clouds swallowing the moon, casting the night in an eerie darkness. Inside the study, Archer Calloway swirled a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the flickering glow of the fireplace. The storm outside was nothing compared to the ghosts buried beneath his empire, ghosts he had long since silenced. The study was a testament to power. Mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, oil paintings of men who shaped history, a desk so vast it felt like a throne. Yet for all its grandeur, the room felt suffocating. For the first time in years, Archer felt the weight of something unseen pressing in. Beyond the glass, just beyond the fire's reach, a figure stood unmoving in the rain. Daniel. His breath was slow, controlled. Rain dripped from his hood, sliding down his cheek, but he didn't move to wipe it away. His eyes never left the man inside, the man who had stolen everything from him. The years had carved away the boy who once ran for his life. In his place stood a man sharpened by survival, tempered by time. This wasn't about recklessness. This was about precision. The security cameras, already disabled. The guards, neutralized. Silent bodies left in the rain. Nothing stood between him and Archer Calloway. With deliberate steps, Daniel crossed the wet grass, his boots silent against the stone pathway. The back entrance yielded to him without resistance. Warm air rushed to greet him, thick with the scent of aged wood, burning fire, and Archer's ever-present whiskey. The house was unchanged, but it wasn't home. Not anymore. Down the hall, the study door stood slightly ajar, flickering light spilling into the corridor. Daniel moved like a shadow, every motion precise, measured. As he reached the threshold, he spoke. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Archer froze mid-sip, the whiskey glass pausing at his lips. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, quickly chased by something else. Denial. No, it couldn't be. The boy was long dead. But then as Archer met Daniel's gaze, something twisted in his gut. Recognition. And worse, fear. Daniel stepped forward into the full glow of the firelight. His face was carved from stone, unreadable. Rain dripped from his jacket, pooling on the polished hardwood floor. The storm outside raged on, wind rattling the windows like a warning. But the real storm was here, standing only a few feet away. For the first time in decades, Archer Calloway knew what it was to be hunted. 20 years earlier, the town of Ash Hollow was bathed in the golden hues of sunset, the sky a masterpiece of crimson and amber, stretching endlessly over the rolling fields. The air carried the scent of fresh pine and distant wood smoke, the quiet hum of cicadas rising and falling like waves. It was the kind of evening that settled into the bones, a moment so still, so ordinary, that it lulled the world into believing nothing could go wrong. Inside a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, 16-year-old Daniel sat by the window, his forehead resting against the cool glass. His eyes followed the long dirt road leading home, the one his father's truck should have already come rattling down. James Calloway was late, not by much, but enough. James was a man of habit, of routine. He always returned just before dusk, dust trailing behind his truck, stepping out with a tired smile and the smell of the fields still clinging to his clothes. But tonight, the road remained empty, stretching toward the horizon like an unanswered question. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his hands together absent-mindedly. The warmth of the day was fading. twilight creeping in. His mother used to say twilight was a sacred hour, a thin space where the past and future whispered to each other. She believed in omens, in feelings that crept up without reason. Daniel had never put much stock in those things, but tonight something about the silence unsettled him. Then, bang! The sound split the air like a crack of thunder. The house seemed to exhale all at once, the walls absorbing the shock as the echoes rolled into the open fields. Daniel's breath hitched. His body stiffened before instinct propelled him to his feet. His heart pounded as he sprinted toward the door, throwing it open so hard it slammed against the wooden frame. The world outside had shifted. The peaceful evening had been gutted, replaced by something raw and wrong. James Calloway stood at the edge of the porch, staggering, his hand pressed against his chest. Blood, dark and spreading, the color of rust beneath the last light of the sun. James swayed on his feet, a sharp breath escaping his lips before his knees buckled. "Dad!" Daniel was at his father's side in an instant, catching him before he hit the wooden planks. James's weight pressed against him, heavier than Daniel had ever known. His father had always been strong, unshakable, like the land they lived on. But now his grip was slackening, his fingers slipping against Daniel's arm, the warmth of his skin fading by the second. This wasn't just an injury. This was something final. James's fingers tightened on Daniel's sleeve, weak but insistent. His eyes, clouded with pain, locked onto his son's with desperate urgency. "Run!" His voice was barely more than a breath. "Your uncle! Don't let him find you!" Daniel shook his head, panic surging. "No, no, we need to get you help!" "No time!" James exhaled. His fingers twitched once, then went still. A shadow moved near the barn. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. A dark figure, the shooter, was already there, watching. Then, the distant growl of an engine. Headlights flickered down the road, moving fast, too fast. A sleek black car slid to a stop just beyond the porch steps. The doors opened. Men stepped out, 2 of them, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of the headlights. One of them lifted his arm. The moonlight caught the barrel of a pistol. He wasn't searching. He knew exactly where to aim. Everything inside Daniel rebelled against his father's final command. He could drag James inside. He could fight. He could make them pay. But his father's words weren't a request. They were an order. One final, desperate command. And Daniel had never disobeyed his father before. His legs moved before his mind could catch up. He wrenched himself away from James's fading grip, his vision blurred with tears. The night swallowed him whole. The moment Daniel's feet hit the ground, instinct took over. His legs burned as he pushed himself forward, dodging low-hanging branches and thick underbrush. The sound of his own breathing was drowned by the roar of blood in his ears. The wind howled through the trees, and somewhere behind him, the men were closing in. "Find the kid! He can't get away!" The voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. Flashlights flickered between the trunks, slicing through the darkness like blades of light. Daniel veered left, his mind racing. He had no plan, no destination, only one thought pounding in rhythm with his steps. Keep running, don't stop. His boots skidded against the damp earth as he slid behind a fallen log, pressing himself against the cold, moss-covered wood. His chest heaved, his fingers digging into the damp bark. He forced himself to stay still, to listen. Footsteps crunched against the undergrowth, moving fast, too fast. The men were spreading out, searching, their voices low but urgent. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth, swallowing down his ragged breaths. He could feel his pulse hammering in his throat. A beam of light swept over the log, hovering for a moment too long. He shrank lower, curling into himself as if sheer willpower could make him disappear. The light moved on. The footsteps drifted further. "Damn it," one of them muttered. "He's fast." Another voice, gruffer. "He won't make it through the night." The sound of their retreating steps was agonizingly slow. Daniel waited, his body trembling, not just from fear, but from the raw surge of adrenaline crashing through him. He could still hear them, further away now, but still searching. They thought he wouldn't survive. That was good. He could use that. When silence finally settled over the forest, Daniel uncurled himself and rose shakily to his feet. His muscles ached from the tension, his lungs burning from the cold night air. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving. The woods stretched endlessly before him, dark and unwelcoming. But he had no choice. Stumbling forward, he disappeared deeper into the unknown, his silhouette swallowed by the trees. Darkness settled over the forest like a thick shroud, the towering trees swaying against the whispering wind. Daniel stumbled forward, his legs aching, his lungs burning with each breath of the cold, damp air. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but the fear still clung to him, coiling deep in his chest. He had outrun them for now, but something far more menacing awaited him in the wilderness. Hunger, exhaustion, and the crushing solitude of the unknown. The first night was unbearable. His body, pushed to its limit, craved rest. But the forest offered no comfort. He curled up beneath a thicket of bushes, the damp earth seeping through his clothes, chilling him to the bone. Sleep was fleeting, broken by the rustling of unseen creatures and the distant howls that echoed through the trees. His stomach twisted in hunger, but the fear gnawing at his ribs was worse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father, falling, bleeding, whispering his final plea. The image burned into him, playing over and over like a cruel loop. By morning, his body ached, stiff from the cold and from the previous night's desperate sprint through the woods. His throat was dry, his lips cracked. He needed water. He needed anything. Pushing himself up on shaky legs, he forced himself deeper into the forest, scanning the landscape for any sign of sustenance. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth barely reached him beneath the dense canopy. He found a small stream trickling over moss-covered rocks and dropped to his knees, scooping the cold water into his mouth. It was sharp against his throat, but he drank greedily, his hands trembling as he splashed more onto his face. But water wasn't enough. His stomach churned, empty and angry. He searched the undergrowth, spotting clusters of dark berries nestled between the leaves. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over them. His mother had once warned him about wild plants. Some could nourish, others could kill. But hunger didn't care for caution. He plucked a handful and swallowed them down, wincing at their bitterness. If they were poison, he would know soon enough. Time moved sluggishly, marked only by the rhythmic pounding in his skull and the growing ache in his muscles. He walked until his legs threatened to give out, the forest stretching endlessly before him. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on him, forcing him to relive everything he had lost. His father's voice, weak, gasping. "Run, your uncle. Don't let him find you." Daniel clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, it all blurred together, threatening to pull him under. But there was something else, something that burned hotter than his pain. Rage, a need for answers, a need for justice. If he survived, he would find out why his uncle had betrayed them. If he survived, he would make sure no one ever controlled his fate again. With that thought anchoring him, Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed forward, deeper into the wild, where the boy he had been would be stripped away, and something stronger would rise in his place. The forest no longer felt like an enemy. The shadows that once loomed over Daniel now stood like silent sentinels, watching as he learned to navigate their depths. The fear that had gripped him in those first days had dulled, not disappeared, but transformed into something else: awareness, understanding, survival. At first, the wild had been merciless. His body bore the evidence: scratches from low-hanging branches, bruises from missteps in the dark, the dull ache in his ribs from hunger gnawing at him day and night. But necessity forced him to adapt. He watched the animals, mimicking their movements, their instincts. A fox slinking through the underbrush without a sound. A hawk circling the sky, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A deer lowering its head to drink, ever alert, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Daniel became a student of the land, and the forest, indifferent as it was, became his teacher. He learned to move as the animals did, silent, deliberate, unseen. He walked with measured steps, avoiding the crunch of dried leaves, the snap of twigs underfoot. He studied the wind, knowing that any shift could carry his scent to unseen predators, both animal and human. He began to understand the rhythm of the wild, the subtle cues that signaled danger or opportunity. When hunger became unbearable, he crafted crude traps from sharpened sticks and vines, setting them near well-worn game trails. It took days of failure before he caught his first meal, a small rabbit trembling in his grasp. He hesitated for a moment, staring into its dark, terrified eyes. He had never killed anything before, but hunger had stripped away his hesitations. Survival left no room for mercy. Fire came next. He gathered dry branches, stacked them in a careful teepee, and struck stones together until sparks caught the brittle bark. The first time the flames flickered to life, warming his numb fingers, he almost laughed. Control, power, hope. He wasn't helpless anymore. The boy who had stumbled into these woods, lost and hunted, was fading. In his place, something stronger was taking root. Each night after his fire had burned low and the forest had settled into its quiet hum, Daniel lay beneath the vast expanse of sky. The stars blinked overhead, cold and unfeeling, stretching infinitely beyond his reach. He traced their constellations with his eyes, remembering how his mother once told him they were maps for the lost. Maybe he was lost, but not forever. He pressed his fingers into the damp earth beside him, grounding himself. He could still feel the ache of loss, the sharp sting of his father's final words. But beneath the pain, beneath the exhaustion, was something else: determination. His uncle had stolen everything: his home, his family, his childhood. But he hadn't taken Daniel's will. That belonged to him alone. He clenched his fists, whispering the same promise into the darkness, letting it drift into the vastness above him. I will return. The forest had become Daniel's world, but even after weeks of survival, he still hadn't learned all of its secrets. The deeper he wandered, the more the landscape shifted. Tangled vines curling around tree trunks, thick moss swallowing fallen branches, the earth growing softer beneath his feet. The air smelled older here, untouched, as if time itself had forgotten this place. Then he saw it. At first it was nothing more than a dark shape nestled in the underbrush, partially obscured by ferns and creeping ivy. But as he stepped closer, the shape sharpened into something unmistakable. A truck. An old, rusted truck, nearly consumed by nature. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Something about it felt familiar, too familiar. His pulse quickened as he approached, his boots crunching over fallen leaves. The vehicle was covered in layers of grime, streaks of rust bleeding down its sides like scars. Branches had twisted their way through the broken windows, and thick roots curled around its tires, anchoring it to the forest floor as if the earth itself had tried to bury it. He reached out, swiping a hand across the windshield. A thick layer of dirt smeared away beneath his fingertips, revealing something beneath, the faded remnants of a decal his mother had once placed there. Daniel staggered back, his chest tightened, his mind reeling. This was his mother's truck, but that was impossible. This truck had disappeared the same night she did, the same night everything fell apart. His father never spoke about it, and Daniel had always assumed it was just another piece of his past that had been wiped away. But now, standing here, staring at it, he felt something clawing at the back of his mind, a memory just out of reach. He yanked at the driver's side door, but it refused to budge, rust welding it shut. He moved to the passenger side, gripping the handle with both hands and pulling hard. With a sharp groan of metal, the door gave way, swinging open and releasing a thick, musty scent. Inside, the air was stale, trapped for years behind locked doors and sealed windows. A faint scent of aged leather and rust lingered, untouched by time. The windshield was coated in grime, allowing only faint streaks of moonlight to filter through. The seats, though covered in dust, remained intact, the fabric stiff with age. But amidst the stillness, something stood out. A metal box sat on the passenger seat, untouched, its surface covered in scratches but still intact. Beside it, a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed with age. Daniel reached for the letter first. his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. The second his eyes landed on the handwriting, his breath hitched. It was hers, his mother's. She had written this. With a slow, deliberate inhale, he began to read. Daniel, if you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. I don't know if I'm alive or dead, but if you found this, it means I never had the chance to explain everything to you. And I'm so sorry for that. His hands tightened around the paper. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the wind through the trees. He forced himself to keep reading. Your uncle isn't who you think he is. He and the people he works with, they wanted your father gone, and they won't stop until they have everything. I tried to protect you, to stop this before it got worse, but I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't strong enough. But you, my son, you are. I need you to trust no one. Stay hidden. When you're ready, fight back. The words blurred as his vision swam. His mother had known. She had seen this coming. She had tried to save them. Swallowing hard, Daniel turned his attention to the locked metal box. His pulse was a steady drumbeat in his ears as he pried it open. Inside, bundles of cash were stacked neatly, alongside forged identification documents with names he didn't recognize, but all featuring his mother's face. She had planned to escape. Had she tried to run that night? Had his uncle found her first? The last thing in the box was small, just a single slip of paper folded tightly between the stacks of money. He unfolded it carefully. 4 words. Don't let them win. Daniel's hands trembled. His mother had left this for him. Not just money, not just a warning, but a mission. She had known he would come looking for answers. A cold determination settled in his bones. His uncle had taken everything. His father, his mother, his home. But he had failed to take Daniel. He wasn't that scared boy anymore, lost and alone in the woods. He was someone else now, and one day he would return. The letter in Daniel's hands trembled, though from the cold or the words seared into his mind, he couldn't tell. The dim light filtering through the forest canopy barely reached the yellowed paper, but he didn't need to see every letter. The truth had already burned itself into his soul. His uncle, the man who had smiled at family gatherings, who had once ruffled Daniel's hair when he was a boy. The man who had murdered his father. His hands tightened into fists, crumpling the edges of the paper as he read on. I should have seen it sooner. His mother's handwriting was steady, but beneath the ink, Daniel could feel the weight of her fear. Your uncle never forgave your father for inheriting the land. He believed it was his by right. He let the resentment fester, let greed whisper in his ear, until it became something worse, something ruthless. I think he planned it for years. Daniel's jaw clenched so hard it ached. The letter continued. I overheard them. He and the lawyer, Collins. They were arranging everything. The accounts, the false documents, the will. It wasn't just about taking the land, Daniel. They wanted it all. And your father, he never saw it coming. The air left Daniel's lungs. The truth was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on him. His mother had known. She had tried to stop it. I confronted your uncle. I thought I could reason with him, remind him that this was family. But he wasn't the man I thought he was. The look in his eyes when he told me it was too late. I knew then. I was never supposed to walk away from that conversation. Daniel swallowed, his throat raw. His mother had fought. She had tried to escape. That was why the truck had been hidden out here. She must have been on the run when they caught up to her. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm leaving this for you. If something happens to me, you'll need to know the truth. You'll need to survive. You'll need to fight. His fingers curled over the edge of the paper, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. He closed his eyes, but the words still blazed in his mind. His mother hadn't just died. She had been hunted, killed, and the people responsible had taken everything. His father, his home, his future. A sharp breath rattled out of him, hot with rage, cold with clarity. He had spent weeks barely surviving, clinging to life in these woods, thinking it was enough just to stay ahead of the past. But now he wasn't running anymore. Daniel folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the box with the money, the documents, the remnants of a life that had been stolen from him. He would keep it, not as a memory, but as a reminder. The boy who had fled into the woods, lost and afraid, was gone. The man who would return had just been born. The bus rattled as it rolled through the military base gates, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. Daniel sat near the back, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. Around him, young men his age shifted in their seats, some whispering anxiously, others staring blankly ahead. For many, this was the beginning of a dream. For Daniel, it was something else entirely. It was a crucible, a means to an end. When the doors hissed open, barking voices cut through the air. "Move! Now!" The recruits scrambled out, boots hitting the pavement in hurried, uneven steps. Daniel followed, his spine straight, his face unreadable. But deep inside, his heart pounded with something dangerously close to doubt. He had survived the wild, taught himself to endure the elements. But this was different. The discipline, the structure, the relentless, merciless breaking down of everything he thought he knew. The first days were hell. The first months were worse. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. He was the weakest. During morning runs, his legs gave out before the others. During drills, he collapsed in the dirt while others stood firm. He felt their eyes on him, his fellow recruits, the instructors, waiting for him to fail, and he almost did, over and over. His body hit the ground more times than he could count. His arms trembled beneath the weight of endless push-ups. The blisters on his hands burst, bled, and hardened into calluses. His ribs ached from being knocked flat during combat training. His lungs burned from running miles on an empty stomach. But every time he hit the ground, something pulled him back up. His father's voice, his mother's letter, the memory of blood staining the front porch. Pain was temporary. Failure was not an option. So he pushed harder, past the burning muscles, past the exhaustion, past the voice in his head telling him to quit. When his body screamed for rest, he ran farther. When his arms gave out, he willed them to keep moving. When his mind whispered that he was done, he reminded himself. He had already survived worse. The transformation was slow, but undeniable. He stopped being the last man in the pack. He stopped falling behind. His strikes became sharper, more controlled. His body no longer fought against the pain. It absorbed it, used it, grew stronger from it. The instructors took notice. The recruit who had once struggled to keep up now ran with quiet determination. The one who had collapsed in the mud now held his stance, eyes locked forward, unwavering. By the end of training, he wasn't just another soldier. He was something else entirely. A man no longer defined by his past, a warrior shaped by fire. And the fire inside him was just getting started. The transformation didn't end with training. It was only the beginning. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's skills sharpened. His strikes became lethal, his movements calculated. He learned to fight in silence, to disappear into the shadows before an enemy even knew he was there. Hand-to-hand combat became second nature. Infiltration became an art. Intelligence gathering, a deadly game. His superiors took notice. There was something different about him. He wasn't just strong, he was relentless, methodical, precise. His first missions were small, high-risk extractions, reconnaissance deep in enemy territory. Each success hardened him further, stripping away hesitation, replacing it with cold efficiency. He moved like a ghost, striking with precision, leaving no trace behind. His fellow soldiers learned to respect him. Some even feared him. He was no longer the struggling recruit gasping for breath in the mud. Now, when he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. But no matter how far he went, no matter how deep into enemy lines he ventured, his mind was still in Montana. His mission had never changed. Years had passed, and when the moment was right, he vanished without a trace. Daniel Calloway was gone. In his place stood a man with a name that did not belong to him, a past meticulously fabricated, a face that no longer bore the weight of the boy who had once fled into the woods. He boarded a plane bound for Montana, silent, unreadable, his hands steady, his pulse calm. His uncle had spent years believing the past was buried, that Daniel had been swallowed by the night all those years ago. He never realized that what he had sought to erase was now returning, sharpened by time, honed by discipline. carrying the quiet patience of a predator waiting for the perfect strike. The estate Daniel once called home had become something else entirely. A fortress of corruption, its walls built with fear, its halls echoing with the weight of stolen power. The man who had once lived there now sat atop an empire, his wealth built on deceit, his reach stretching into the pockets of politicians, police, and anyone willing to be bought. But Daniel knew the truth about men like his uncle. Power gained through greed was never unshakable. It only took the right fracture to bring everything crumbling down. For weeks, Daniel drifted through the underbelly of his uncle's empire, a phantom in the darkness, watching, waiting. He moved unseen, yet his presence coiled around every shadowed corridor, every whispered conversation. He listened to the hushed confessions of corrupt men, traced the flow of stolen money hidden in accounts meant to never be found. Layer by layer, he unraveled the web of deceit his uncle had spent years weaving, dismantling it thread by thread. Every document, every recorded betrayal, every name on a ledger was a nail in the coffin of a crumbling dynasty. He wasn't merely gathering evidence. He was tightening the noose. He was no longer a man chasing vengeance. He was the reckoning. The stage was set, the pieces in place, and soon his uncle would come to understand a truth he had never feared. Some ghost refused to rest. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees, rattling the towering windows of the estate. Rain lashed against the glass in heavy sheets, but inside the study, the world remained eerily still. A fire crackled in the grand stone fireplace, its flickering glow casting long shadows across the mahogany walls. Archer Calloway sat in his leather chair, a crystal glass of whiskey resting loosely in his grip. His expression was one of confidence, of untouchable power, until he saw the figure step out of the darkness. Daniel stood there, rain dripping from his hood, his presence consuming the room like a ghost come to claim what was owed. At first, Archer only blinked, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Then his face paled, the blood draining from it all at once, the color of a man staring into his own grave. "You?" The word barely left Archer's lips, strangled by disbelief. His fingers twitched, his knuckles white against the glass. "You're supposed to be dead." Daniel took another step forward, his boots sinking into the thick rug, his movements slow, deliberate, controlled. The boy Archer had left to die all those years ago no longer existed. This was something else, something cold, something relentless. "You killed my parents," Daniel said, his voice steady, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. His gaze never wavered. "Now it's over." Archer's breath came in short, rapid bursts. His hand inched toward the desk, toward the hidden compartment beneath it. A gun, his only chance, his only escape. But before his fingers could reach the edge of the wood, the door behind him burst open. A dozen armed agents stormed in, their weapons raised, their voices a commanding roar. "Hands where we can see them!" Panic flared in Archer's eyes. He spun, only to find himself staring down the barrels of a dozen loaded rifles. His world, the empire he had built brick by brick on the backs of lies, was crumbling. Strong hands wrenched him from his chair, twisting his arms behind his back. Cold steel snapped around his wrists. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled, his body thrashing like a trapped animal. "You don't understand," Archer's voice cracked with desperation. "I built this. I made this happen. You can't—" Daniel watched in silence, his expression unreadable, as his uncle was dragged toward the door. The man who had once held all the power in the world now had none. The storm outside howled louder. Archer twisted his head back, his eyes locking on to Daniel one final time. His voice dropped into a low, venomous growl. "This isn't over." For the first time, Daniel let a small breath escape, not quite a laugh, more like a sigh of finality. He stepped forward, closing the space between them until their faces were inches apart. "Yes, Archer," he said, his voice calm, certain. "It is." The door slammed shut. Justice had been served, and the ghost had finally laid his past to rest. Days later, beneath a sky streaked with pale morning light, Daniel stood before two headstones, the names of his parents carved into the cold granite. The cemetery was quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. The world felt still, as if it too was holding its breath. In his hands, he held a bouquet of white roses, their petals pristine against the muted gray of the sky. He knelt, placing them gently at the base of the stones. His fingers traced over the letters of his father's name, then his mother's. The coldness of the stones seeped into his skin, grounding him in the moment. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I kept my promise." The words carried weight, heavier than he expected, settling deep in his chest. The wind stirred, rustling through the trees, lifting his words and scattering them into the stillness. He liked to think they heard him. For years, his purpose had been singular: justice, or perhaps revenge. He had chased it relentlessly, allowed it to consume him, fuel him, shape him into something unbreakable. But now that it was done, now that his parents' killer was gone, his empire dismantled, Daniel felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not relief, peace. A slow breath left him, long and steady, as if he were releasing the past with it. He wasn't that frightened boy who had fled into the woods, nor the hardened soldier forged in war and fury. He was something else now, something free. He stood, his gaze lingering on the graves for a final moment. He had spent his whole life looking back, chasing ghosts, carrying the weight of what had been taken from him. But now, as he turned away, stepping toward the open road, toward the unknown, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't running toward revenge. He was simply moving forward. There are stories that stay with us, not because they are filled with vengeance, but because they reveal something deeper about the human spirit. Daniel's journey was never just about revenge. It was about resilience, about reclaiming a life that was nearly stolen from him, about surviving not just to exist, but to find meaning beyond his pain. Life has a way of testing us, of breaking us down and forcing us into moments where we must decide. Do we let the past define us, or do we carve out a new future with our own hands? Daniel's story is a reminder that we are more than the worst things that have happened to us. We are the sum of our choices, our will to fight, our ability to rise when the world has tried to bury us. Perhaps you too have faced something that changed you, a loss, a betrayal, a moment when everything you knew was stripped away. But survival is not the end of the story. The real power lies in what you do next. Do you remain chained to the past, or do you step forward into the unknown, ready to reclaim your life? If this story spoke to you, if you've ever fought through hardship and come out the other side, share your journey. Let others see that survival is possible, that strength is born in struggle. And if you want more stories of resilience, justice, and redemption, stay with us. There is always more to tell. Because the past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. Only we decide what comes next.